You know, when we take a car to the mechanic or even when we go to the doctor for a broken bone, there is this incredibly comforting expectation of precision.
Oh, absolutely.
Right. You point to the problem, the professional runs a diagnostic, and they say, here's the broken part, let's fix it.
Right. And then magically the machine is back to normal.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But we take that exact same mechanical mindset and we like apply it to our inner lives, to our anxiety, our relationship drama, our lack of motivation.
Yeah. We just want a quick fix.
We really do. We walk into a therapist's office or pick up a self-help book and essentially say, here is my broken part, fix me. So today we are pulling from the profound and I'd say highly counterintuitive ideas in Thomas More's book, Care of the Soul.
It's such a fascinating read.
It really is. And the goal for our deep dive today is to offer you a shortcut to a completely different paradigm of self-understanding. Okay, let's unpack this. What if the things you hate most about yourself, like your jealousy, your dependency, your sudden bouts of sadness or rage?
It's really ugly stuff, yeah.
Right. What if those aren't broken gears in a machine that need to be exterminated, but actual pathways to a much deeper life?
Yeah, and that is the core provocation of More's work. He argues that our modern obsession with self-improvement, optimizing our lives to achieve this shiny, well-adjusted normality, is actually a trap.
Like we're just declaring war on our own nature.
Exactly. We end up fighting ourselves. And to understand why this happens, we really have to look at a fundamental distinction he makes between two forces that drive us. And those are spirit and soul.
Which, I mean, we usually use those words interchangeably, right?
All the time.
But in this context, they represent entirely different psychological needs.
So how do those two forces pull us in different directions? Like, practically speaking.
Well, spirit is the part of us that wants to ascend. It wants goals, it wants balance, it wants to climb the mountain and achieve clarity, perfection, and like cosmic understanding.
So spirit is what drives you to create a 5-year plan. Yes. Or to bullet journal your way to maximum productivity. It expands the mind. But soul operates entirely differently. Soul wants to descend.
It's ascend.
Yeah, it wants depth. It wants messiness. It wants to sink into the valleys of human experience. Soul thrives on intimacy, strong emotions, weird quirks, and, our complicated attachments to the world.
Oh, wow. So if spirit wants a clean, bulleted agenda for the future, soul wants a messy, complicated, emotional conversation late into the night.
That is the perfect way to put it.
That makes a lot of sense, actually, because when we are trying to, quote unquote, fix our lives, we are almost exclusively operating from spirit.
Right. We want the clean plan to eradicate the mess.
Yeah, we want to transcend the problem entirely.
And in doing so, we completely starve the soul, which actually brings us to the real root of the word therapy.
Because we think of therapy as a medical intervention now, right? Like achieving a definitive cure.
Exactly. But Moore points out that the Greek root, therapia, was used by Plato to describe tending to an animal, like a horse on a farm.
Tending to a horse.
Yeah. I mean, you don't cure a horse of being a horse.
Right, obviously.
Therapia means feeding it, brushing it down, giving it water, cleaning out its stall. It is about everyday, ordinary attention and care.
Yeah.
Like an ongoing relationship.
Not a one-time medical procedure to fix a broken part.
Exactly. It's care versus cure.
Care versus cure. So instead of eradicating our problems, we're supposed to tend to them. But how does that actually play out in real life?
There's a fantastic case study in the source material about this. It's about a man who was completely miserable. He worked in a manufacturing shop, a grueling factory job, for 10 years, and he absolutely hated it.
10 years is a long time to hate your job.
Yeah, and for a decade, he spent all his psychological energy planning his escape to this, promised land of a better profession.
Was he just living in the future?
Entirely. Because his mind was always living in this idealized future, he did his actual factory job terribly. He was constantly distracted and bitter. So naturally, he went to therapy, expecting the therapist to act as an allopathic doctor.
To help him finalize his escape route, basically.
Right, to cure the disease of his bad job.
And I would assume the therapist's job is to help him build up the confidence to finally quit and go find that better life.
Well, Moore did the exact opposite.
Really?
Yeah, he told the man to stop living in the fantasy of escape and to fully enter his fate. He instructed his client to go do that stupid factory job with his whole heart.
Wait, you mean just embrace the awful job?
Exactly. To pay attention to the machinery, to engage with his coworkers, to actually inhabit the building he walked into every day.
I imagine the man was not thrilled to hear that.
He was incredulous, but he did it. He started taking his actual present life seriously, and the shift in his mindset was profound. Entering his fate instead of fleeing it allowed his soul to actually engage with reality.
But wait, if someone is miserable at work, or let's say they're in a terrible, stagnant relationship, telling them to just be in it sounds a lot like giving up. Are we just romanticizing misery here?
It can sound that way, yeah.
It just feels like we are telling people to settle for suffering.
What's fascinating here is that it is not about giving up or settling. It is what Moore calls a homeopathic approach to the psyche.
Okay, break that down for me.
So, in modern medicine, an allopathic approach fights the symptom with its opposite. If you have a fever, you take a pill that forces your body temperature down.
Right.
But a homeopathic approach goes with the symptom. You lean into it to find its value. By telling the man to fully enter the job he hated, Moore was addressing the actual psychological mechanism of his suffering.
Which was what? The split identity.
Exactly. The man's suffering wasn't just the job, it was the fact that he had split his identity. He was living as a passive victim in the bad present, while his spirit lived in the perfect future.
Oh, I see.
By committing to the present, he reclaimed his agency. He stopped being a passive victim of his circumstances. You don't cure the soul by heroically ripping its struggles away. You care for the soul by letting it speak through those struggles.
Which naturally restores a person's mentality. That's really profound. So if the goal isn't to fix our present symptoms, but to listen to them and tend to them, what does that mean for how we view the past?
That's a huge shift.
Because modern psychology almost universally points the finger backward. We are taught that the root cause of all our current symptoms is the dysfunctional family.
The family is universally treated as the origin of all our broken parts, yeah. But Moore suggests a radical reinterpretation of this day. Think about the word dysfunction.
Okay.
That prefix domestis actually shares an etymological connection with Dis, the Roman god of the underworld.
The underworld. Oh, wow. So the dysfunction isn't a mechanical error in the family unit.
No, it is a literal descent into the shadows.
Yeah.
From the soul's perspective, the family is not supposed to be this pristine, highly functioning, frictionless machine.
It's not a sitcom family.
Exactly. It's meant to be a messy, earthy weed patch. It is full of shadows, secrets, weird uncles, and complex, sometimes painful dynamics.
So that underworld element, that dysfunction, is the friction that shapes character.
Yeah. It is the literal crack where the soul enters.
That turns the whole modern therapeutic model on its head. It means we need to stop analyzing our families like we are clinical sociologists.
Right, like we're diagnosing a patient.
Like saying, I am the child of an alcoholic, therefore I have these specific attachment issues,
Yeah.
or my mother was a narcissist, therefore I am permanently codependent.
We just love labels.
We do.
Yeah.
We etherize our own histories on an operating table and turn ourselves into clinical case studies.
Because we try to rationally distance ourselves from the mess. But when you do that, you end up repressing the very raw material your soul needs to build your identity.
And that causes more problem.
Huge problems.
Rare.
Moore shares the story of a client named David to illustrate how dangerous this clinical distancing can be. David was 28 years old, but the text describes him as an eternal youth.
Meaning he hadn't really grown up.
Right. He lived alone in his own apartment, but he was incredibly dependent on his mother. Like, going home to see her every single weekend while constantly complaining about prying into his life.
Oh, classic dynamic.
Yeah. The real shadow in the room, the source of the family's dysfunction, was his father.
Because the father was entirely absent.
Absent and notorious. His father was a wandering womanizer who was barely ever around. And growing up, David's entire operating philosophy was, I will never, ever be like my father.
So he went to the complete opposite extreme.
Exactly. He made this heroic, conscious effort to eradicate any trace of his father's influence from his own personality. He wanted to be the pure, responsible opposite.
But the mechanism of repressing that trait backfired on him, didn't it?
Severely. Because when you completely repress a family myth, you don't just eliminate the bad behavior, you amputate the corresponding vital energy.
Right, because there's energy wrapped up in those traits.
Yeah. His father was messy and unfaithful, yes, but that archetype is also dynamic, romantic, and adventurous. By completely rejecting the wandering myth of his father, David essentially sterilized his own life.
He threw the baby out with the bathwater.
Exactly. He ended up with no relationships at all. He became stagnant. He never traveled. He never took risks. He just stayed safely tethered to his mother. Repressing that family myth didn't save him from dysfunction. It completely impoverished his soul.
It's like we treat our family histories as crime scenes to be coldly investigated. We map out the evidence, we identify the perpetrator, the bad father, the overbearing mother, and we try to neatly solve the case so we can move on.
Oh, that is the perfect way to frame it.
But Moore is saying we should treat our family history like an epic novel we're currently starring in.
Yes. A crime scene implies a tidy resolution where the mess is cleaned up and the anomalous bad actor is removed. An epic novel embraces the tragedy, the flaws, and the complexity of the characters.
So what happened with David?
When David finally started asking about his father's life, leaning into the stories of who this man actually was without immediate moral judgment, his relationship with both of his parents shifted.
Did he become a womanizer?
No, not at all. But by accepting his family's epic novel, he reclaimed the romantic, adventurous energy he had been suppressing his entire life.
Let's follow that logic for a second. If the family's dysfunction is actually a vital feature, a necessary underworld for the soul, does that mean my own personal bugs, like my ugliest personal traits, are actually features too?
They absolutely are.
Because we usually view things like narcissism, jealousy, and envy as toxic traits that need to be eradicated immediately.
Right, but under the care of the soul paradigm, those ugly traits are desperate signals of neglected soul needs. They are literally gold mines.
Okay, give me an example. What about narcissism?
Good one. We throw that word around today to describe anyone with an inflated ego or a self-centered attitude.
Ugh.
But Moore takes us back to Ovid's original myth of Narcissus.
The boy who falls in love with his own reflection in the pool.
Yes, but the psychological mechanism of the myth is widely misunderstood. Narcissism isn't having too much self-love. It is actually the inability to love the self.
Hey, really? The inability to love the self?
Yes. In the myth, Narcissus was hard, cold, and rejected everyone around him because he fundamentally didn't know how to connect or love. When he looks into the deep, dark pool, he is mesmerized because he actually thinks he is looking at someone else.
Oh, I never realized that part.
Yeah, the cure for his condition wasn't to look away from the pool. He is cured by staring into the water until he realizes that the beautiful, mysterious image is himself as another.
So the cure isn't forced humility. It is going deeper into the self until you find a version of yourself that you can actually have a relationship with.
Precisely. Because you cannot have a relationship with a shallow ego, you can only relate to a soul.
That is wild.
It changes everything. Moore shares a brilliant anecdote about a college student who came into his office and confessed, with total unblinking seriousness, that he was Jesus Christ.
Oh boy.
Yeah, he believed he had a divine mission to save the world and could perform literal miracles.
I mean, a purely clinical approach would label that a dangerous psychotic delusion immediately. The instinct would be to medicate him, ground him, and drag him back down to practical reality.
Of course. But crushing that delusion would be an allopathic attack on the symptom.
Yeah.
Moore saw this grandiose narcissism as the student's raw idealism trying to flower.
So he didn't try to shut it down?
No, the narcissism was the only vehicle that young man's soul had to express his massive, overwhelming desire to do good in the world. Curing him by forcibly dragging him down to earth would have just turned him into a cynic.
Wow.
The psychological task was to nurture the myth within the symptom until it matured into something constructive, rather than destroying it.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though, because Moore also talks about negative narcissism.
Yes, this is a great concept.
We usually assume that putting ourselves down, being overly modest, or constantly criticizing ourselves is the exact opposite of narcissism. Like, we think self-deprecation is a sign of humility.
Everyone thinks that.
But Moore shows that masochistic self-criticism is actually just narcissism in reverse. There was a painter in the book who was incredibly talented, but every time she received a compliment, she deflected it.
She couldn't take a compliment to save her life.
Exactly. She would say, oh, I haven't studied enough, or I'm not really trained. She thought she was being humble.
But she wasn't.
No. By constantly obsessing over her lack of pedigree and her own inferior image, she was entirely disconnected from the actual art. She couldn't attach to the world because she was trapped staring into a negative mirror.
She was just as obsessed with her image as someone who thinks they are perfect.
It is the exact same inability to love the self, just wearing a different mask.
Which is such a trap. And this brings us to another highly condemned emotion, jealousy.
Oh, jealousy is the worst.
We view jealousy as a definitive sign of insecurity or relational toxicity, but Moore frames it through the concept of psychological polytheism.
Polytheism. So we're talking about having multiple gods or driving forces in our head at the same time instead of just one unified personality.
Yes, exactly. Our souls are not a single unified monarchy where one rational ruler makes all the decisions. We have competing, often wildly contradictory demands inside us.
Makes sense.
And when we ignore one of those demands to favor another, the neglected drive doesn't just disappear, it goes underground and lashes out. Moore uses the Greek myth of Hippolytus to explain this.
Hippolytus, right.
So Hippolytus was exclusively devoted to Artemis, the goddess of purity, nature, and the hunt. He prided himself on his spotless morality and completely ignored Aphrodite, the goddess of sex, love, and messy human connection.
And Greek gods do not like being ignored.
They absolutely hate it. Aphrodite, feeling deeply neglected, became violently jealous and orchestrated his total destruction.
So he was destroyed by his own purity.
Basically, Hippolytus is destroyed because he tried to be too pure. He ignored the polytheistic demands of his own soul. And this dynamic plays out in ordinary life all the time.
Okay, how so?
Well, Moore tells the story of a young man working at a fast food restaurant who rode a bicycle everywhere. He was the modern, everyday embodiment of Hippolytus.
Like super pure and detached.
Incredibly high-minded.
Sure.
He believed absolutely in personal freedom, in never smothering a partner, in pure, detached, enlightened ideals of love.
But let me guess, his actual relationship was a mess.
It was a total nightmare. In reality, he was consumed by violent, paranoid jealousy toward his girlfriend.
The guy who valued freedom.
Yes. He was screaming at her, feeling physical urges to hit her, checking up on her constantly. He was terrified of his own feelings because they completely contradicted his conscious values of freedom and tolerance.
So what was the actual mechanism behind the jealousy? Why did this guy who valued freedom turn into a paranoid policeman?
Because of his neglected needs. By being so pure and pretending he didn't need attachment, boundaries, or order in his relationship, he pushed his natural human desire for possessiveness into the shadows.
And from the shadows, that need turned demonic.
Exactly. His violent jealousy was actually his soul begging for deep, messy, structured attachment. Again, you apply the homeopathic cure.
You go with the symptom.
You don't tell the jealous person, stop being jealous, you just need to trust her more. You ask the jealousy what it's trying to achieve.
Which in his case was commitment.
Right. He needed to start being so casually tolerant and actually admit that he wanted a committed, ordered relationship.
That makes perfect sense, but it raises a huge practical question.
What's that?
If all these messy traits, our family histories, our narcissism, our violent jealousy, are vital parts of the soul trying to speak, how do we actually handle them in the moment?
It's definitely challenging.
Because when a dark fantasy or a jealous rage hits, our modern instinct is to aggressively dissect it. We want to drag it into the light, figure out exactly why it's happening, and control it.
And this is where we have to contrast Herculean ego power with soul power.
Herculean ego power. I like that phrase.
It's what modern society teaches us to value. Brute force, willpower, radical transparency, forcing a resolution, analyzing every single motive until there are no secrets left.
We love analyzing our motives.
We do. But soul power operates in the dark. It is about emptiness, containment, and respecting mystery. There's a beautiful Sufi story in the text about a man named Nuri Bey that perfectly captures the strength of soul power.
Oh, the story with the chess.
Yes. So Nuri Bey is an older, highly respected man married to a much younger woman. One day, a servant comes to him and says, "Your wife is acting suspiciously. She has a massive locked wooden chest in her room, big enough to hold a man, and she absolutely refuses to let me look inside."
Naturally, the assumption is a hidden lover.
Right. So Nuri Bey goes to his wife's room. He finds her sitting next to this locked chest, looking troubled. He asks her to show him what is inside.
Moment of truth.
She asks him, "Are you doing this because a servant is suspicious or because you fundamentally do not trust me?" He says, "Wouldn't it be easier just to open it and be done with the undertones?"
Valid point.
She says, "I do not think it possible." But she holds up the key. She offers him the power to force the issue, to rip the lid off, and demand total literal truth.
And what does he do?
Nuri Bey dismisses the servant. He takes the key. But he sits and thinks for a long time. And then, instead of opening the chest, he calls 4 gardeners.
Wait, gardeners?
Together, in the dead of night, they carry the unopened chest to a distant part of the estate. They bury it deep in the earth, and they never speak of it again.
Think about that for a second. Could you leave that chest locked?
It's so hard to imagine doing that today.
It really is. If you thought your partner was hiding something, our modern instinct is to rip off the lid and demand the absolute truth. We want to confront the issue head on.
We feel entitled to the truth.
And we do this to ourselves too. We constantly try to dissect our every thought, to drag every dark fantasy or embarrassing urge into the harsh light of a therapist's office to be analyzed, categorized, and solved.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, true psychological power often comes from tolerating the unknown. Sometimes the soul requires us to check our urgency.
To just let things be.
Right. Not everything needs to be exposed, processed, and understood rationally. The chest represents our unanalyzable moods, our deep unconscious drives.
So the mystery is actually important.
Crucial. Sometimes preserving the mystery of the soul, allowing our partners and ourselves to have buried, unopened chests of fantasy, shadow, and unexpressed depth is the ultimate act of care. It takes far more internal strength and power to bury the chest than it does to impulsively rip it open.
So what does this all mean for you walking around in your daily life? We have covered a massive amount of ground today.
We really have.
We started by firing the exterminator, stopping the endless, exhausting quest to cure your symptoms, and instead learning to care for them like you would tend to a living animal.
Tending to the soul.
We talked about reimagining your messy, dysfunctional family not as a clinical crime scene to be solved, but as the mythic, epic novel that provides the friction to build your character.
The underworld of the family.
Yes. We discovered how the things you might despise most in yourself, your narcissism and your jealousy, are actually golden nuggets. They are the soul's desperate plea for self-love, for attachment, and for a polytheistic acceptance of your own complex, contradictory needs.
And we learn to bury the chest.
And finally, we learn the profound strength it takes to leave the chest locked, to embrace the mystery and stop trying to shine a harsh, clinical light on every shadow in your mind. This entire paradigm gives you permission to be a complex, deeply feeling human being, rather than a broken machine that constantly needs a quick fix.
It is a profound relief, honestly, to know that the goal of life isn't to be perfectly adjusted or entirely frictionless. The goal is to be soulfully deep.
As we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with one final, provocative thought to mull over on your own. Thomas More points out that in mythology, true initiation always involves a kind of death. If you are going to truly embrace this soul-centric view of life, it means you have to let the carefully curated, perfectly adjusted, innocent version of yourself die. That pristine image of who you thought you were supposed to be has to go.
It has to make way for something real.
Exactly. So the next time you feel a terrible symptom, a sudden burst of irrational rage, a heavy bout of sadness, or a weird, embarrassing obsession, what if, instead of rushing to the mechanic to fix the broken part, you ask that symptom a question? What if you asked it what it is trying to build from the ashes of your old self?